So I want to welcome you here to what is really a very historic event. It's the first time New Thought has ever pulled together in such a way to use this technology to be able to be together around a topic that's really so very important to our country, and for us to be able to show up together within our spiritual practice and within our spiritual teaching and see what it is that we can do to maybe do some healing, maybe make a difference. So my name is Reverend Wendy Craig Purcell, and I'm here at the Unity Center, and we are helping to host this event, and we are part of a nationwide dialogue that we're going to be participating in here in just a couple of minutes. But what I'd like us to do here in our sanctuary, and I want to invite all of our streaming audience and all of our Unity and Science of Mind churches all around the country that are participating, for us to join together in a moment of prayer. And I just invite you to close your eyes and let us come together and let us realize that we are part of a very powerful movement, that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us in this teaching, and that we have an opportunity now in ways that we've never had before to connect and to raise our voices together and to lift our hands out in service as a New Thought community to truly transform not only our lives, but to help heal our world. And so we have gathered together around the country today to watch a movie, White Like Me, and to participate not only in watching that movie, but to also talk about it. And so we just give thanks that we are here together in such a way and that we are about to continue this dialogue together. And so just hold with me right now the highest and best good for this brief time together of connecting, of recognizing our oneness with each other, and being willing to be opened and changed and ready to make a difference. We give thanks in advance that this is so, and we give thanks in advance that we will do our part. And join me in saying, and so it is. All righty, well, we've got ministers from all around the country who have done exactly what we've done here at the Unity Center this afternoon. Watch the movie, White Like Me, sit around tables and have a dialogue and a conversation. And I want to invite and bring in visually through our technology the ministers who are gathered together today watching this movie and talking. So I am Reverend Wendy Craig Purcell here at the Unity Center in San Diego, and I'd like to have you welcome and see Dr. Cathy Hearn.
I'm Dr. Cathy Hearn here with Dr. Christian Sorensen at Seaside Center for Spiritual Living in Encinitas, California.
And I'd like to welcome Reverend Guy Williams.
Good afternoon. This is Reverend Guy Williams in Fallbrook, California, and in our community. We have just watched this. Greetings to everybody nationwide.
Reverend Jane Westerkamp. Don't you love technology? All right, Jane Westerkamp, I'm not sure where you are, but Reverend Jane Westerkamp from Center for Spiritual Living.
Do you hear me, Wendy?
Can we see your community?
I don't know what they're doing.
All righty. And Reverend Patty Paris from Vision Center for Spiritual Living. Reverend Patty, are you there? Reverend Laura Cameron.
Good afternoon. This is Reverend Dr. Patrick Cameron, Laura's husband, who signed us up for this, and we're here in our community. I'd show you my community, but it's a big white light coming in right now. So, but we're happy to join you in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So good afternoon.
Have you? Dr. Tony Fish.
Hi. Wow, that was pretty cool. This is Reverend Tony Fish.
Tony is from Maryland.
Okay. That's the community.
Reverend Russell
Reverend Tony
Highland.
Fish and Frederick, now that we've got our technology working. There you go.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Reverend Russell Highland with Unity Unity in Oakton, Virginia, joined by 80 of my closest friends. Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Am I still on? Hey, so let's raise an offering. We haven't done that yet. So, social justice causes that make a difference in the world.
Reverend Eileen Owen from Unity of Fredericksburg. Are you there in Virginia? All righty, we'll go on to Reverend Christy Snow.
Hello, Eileen Owen.
Hi, Eileen.
Hi, I am Eileen Owen from Unity of Fredericksburg in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And this is our crowd here.
Welcome. Reverend Christy Snow.
Hi, Christy Snow here from Charlotte, North Carolina with the Carolina Center for Spiritual Awakening. We are a brand new community and this is our first group event. We feel passionate about it. We have some folks gathered here. I don't know if you can see them over my shoulder. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Reverend Aaron Mccabe.
There we go. I am Reverend Aaron Mccabe, and we're here representing Unity Headquarters. I'm representing Unity Village Chapel, and we are co-hosting with our KC community. So we have over 100 people here. We're co-hosting with Unity of Overland Park and Reverend Brandon Nagel, and Unity North and Reverend Myra McFadden, and Unity Worldwide Ministries is in the house. So you've got all of us here in KC at the headquarters.
Hey, Unity! Reverend Becky Whitehead and Reverend Karen Saunders. Reverend Becky Whitehead and Reverend Karen Saunders. I know that there's much more of a delay with this than what we originally thought. So there she is. Reverend Becky.
Reverend Becky Whitehead from Unity of Omaha in Omaha, Nebraska.
And Reverend Karen Saunders, Christ Love Unity Church, Omaha, Nebraska.
Yay! All righty, might take a little while to get her on, but Reverend Janet Lang.
This is Reverend Janet Lang.
Hey, Janet.
Hi, from Unity of Littleton and Littleton, Colorado. And this is my group.
Yay! Reverend John Moreland.
There we are. Hi, this is John Moreland from Light on the Mountain Center for Spiritual Living in Sun Valley, Idaho. Yay, and here's our people.
Glad you could join us. Reverend Michael Bernard Laxmore.
Hi, family. This is, oh, that's almost me. Not quite. Can you see us now?
Where are you from, Michael?
We are from the Higher Center for Spiritual Living, and we are in Pasadena, California. And behind me, there's our family. Woo-hoo.
All right. Dr. Michael Beckwith and Reverend Carolyn Wilkins.
So active small.
Michael. Wendy to Michael. Dr. Michael Beckwith and Reverend Carolyn Wilkins from Mccabe in Los Angeles.
Wendy,
We
this
might
is
need to circle
Barbara.
back.
They're signed on, but I don't think that they're either hearing us or at their computer right now. So we'll hear from them later.
Okay, we'll go back. Reverend Abigail Scherer.
Hi, this is Reverend Abigail Shire, and I'm here at Center for Spiritual Living Peninsula, and we are in Redwood City, California. Happy to be here with all of you.
Dr. Deborah Johnson.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Oh, hi, I'm Julie Wooden. I'm a practitioner here at Inner Light Ministries. I'm sitting in for Reverend Deborah Johnson, who is in the other room with about 35 to 40 members of our community, having a very deep discussion about the movie, and we wanted to continue that discussion. We got a little bit of a late start, so I'm here representing Inner Light in SoCal, California.
Thrilled that you're with us. My friend, Reverend Kevin Ross.
There he is. Hello, everybody. This is Reverend Eric Donaldson standing in for Rev Kev Ross. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, you can't.
All right. Hit those lights over there. How about this? Hi, I'm Reverend Eric Ovid Donaldson, the Senior Associate Minister of Unity of Sacramento. And we're just having a great time here, enjoying the conversation and really tackling the difficulties and the challenges that it brings. We're happy to be a part. On behalf of Unity Sacramento, its Board of Trustees, and Reverend Kevin Ross.
Reverend Richard Held.
Hi, family. I'm proud to stand before you with my family, the evolving, divine, unfolding idea that is unity in Linwood, Washington. We stand with you.
And Reverend Gayle Dillon.
Hi, Hi, this is Reverend Gayle Dillon. We're Genesis Global Spiritual Center, and we're in Washington, and we're happy to be part of this occasion. Thank you so much. Wave,
Welcome.
everybody. Oh,
All righty, well, we're going to want to be able to hear our members and the different groups, but before we do that, I'd like to give you on you, the Unity Center community here in San Diego. So you and our group and group, would you wave? We've got about 100. In the sanctuary, we had about 150 for the meeting. All righty. So I am going to move us along to be able to share a bit about what come up in our individual gatherings. And so you may have our tables, and then we have helpers distill some of what's up in terms of awareness and discussion here at the Unity Center. So I'm going to read what came up at the Unity Center. Feelings that came up: shock at the statistic embedded in our institutions, sharing sadness and frustration around that. What also surfaced was building an awareness is the first step, such as this event. What else can we do like this to take the awareness further? Interesting and powerful distinction between color versus color consciousness. Let's do more educational events to educate ourselves much more deeply. Another key point, hope that to some degree, racism is generational, that young people are more open and embracing of all. And actions, any action, but be focused more on what we are for and not what we are against. So that was from the Unity Center community. Next, I'd like to welcome and have us hear from Dr. Cathy Hearn at Center for Spiritual Living. Cathy, what was it that surfaced in your time together?
So many wonderful things were said, Wendy. I'll just share a few. An Iranian man began to speak first. We're very grateful for the help he receives in our country, but also the experiences racial profiling. Another member, very proud that we're having the conversation. There was appreciation for the reverse view from the white perspective here. For one woman here, it brought up shame of the racial bias that she experienced in her life. Someone else said that we all like change. We want to see it and hear it, but we don't like to discuss it, so this is a good thing to be doing. An African-American man reflected on racism as experienced by his grandparents and his parents and himself, and now he needs to update it for his 18-year-old son. There was mention of fear of racism, but being proud and happy to be engaged in fighting it. And I think that was a main idea. And in terms of next steps, just carrying on the conversation about implicit bias, about color awareness, setting up classes perhaps, advocating civil rights for all, finding issues in our community and doing something about them, getting involved, getting outside of ourselves. And that's what I can read. so many things that more time would be great to discuss. Thank you.
Reverend Jane Westerkamp at Center for Spiritual Living in Bonita. Jane, how did your conversation go?
Do you hear me now? Wendy?
Yeah. Yes,
Oh,
we hear you.
Okay.
Don't see you, but we hear you.
Our conversation was interesting and deep in that some people have experienced a lot of racism, some have experienced none. Some have participated and unconsciously, and some have not. And one of the interesting things was we have an African American gentleman who said he would like us to remove the hyphen. He would like to just be seen as an American because he's not from Africa, he's from the United States. And our group would like to begin to work together to understand and appreciate different cultures. And the intention is to stop avoiding people who don't look like me, to appreciate different cultures, and to see people for color, because that's a beautiful thing, but to see it in a way that doesn't push our buttons, but that welcomes each other into the conversation. And one thing we're looking at, the San Diego Museum of Man has an exhibit called What is Race? And so we're looking at supporting a field trip to the museum so that we can come back and have another discussion after that. And I thank you for putting this together for us, Wendy. We really appreciate all you've done.
You're welcome, Jay. Maybe the Unity Center folks can join you when you do that.
Should we
Reverend
go back and see if Reverend Guy Williams is ready now?
Sure. Guy, are
Yes,
you around?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we had quite a lively conversation about race. Mostly, we all just sort of shared our surprise at just how insidious racism is woven into our culture, particularly in things like the welfare system and benefit systems and that kind of stuff. What we also talked about here is living in Fallbrook, there is a pronounced culture of racism with the Latino community. And what we realize is that racism is sort of a state of consciousness, and a race is an object, because racism exists and then it's directed towards this person or that group. Our resolution is to keep a conversation going and to speak up in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. And from Reverend Laura, Edmonton, Alberta. Laura, what came up in your group? We're going to know so much more the next time we do something like this. I don't know what the technology piece is, but we're going to know a lot more from it.
Hi there. I'm not Laura. I'm not anywhere near as lovely looking as Laura, but I'm
That's right. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, we have a bit of a different take on things being in Canada, but we had a really wonderful discussion. So the movie, number one, informed many of us of things we were not aware of. The institutionalized racism and the various things that Reverend Guy mentioned. One of the quotes that came up in our group discussion was, the dominant group never understands the subordinate group. And I think that's an example of that. So it's difficult for many of us to identify or to really have the full experience of this, because we're not part of that subordinate group. But at the end of the day, without communication and interaction, we can easily fall into assumptions and cultural conditioning. And when we listen to one another, our stories, we begin to see one another as brothers and sisters, and we stop objectifying. We go from them to we. Now, we had a really interesting discussion, because in Canada, the racism is predominantly around the Indigenous people, the First Nations people. And we had a few members of that community that were with us this afternoon and shared some really compelling stories. So one of the commitments that we've made as a community, are starting to bubble up, is to start having more dialogue and find ways to integrate that into our community. So how do we become better educated? I think education is the key. I really appreciated the movie, I think we all did, of the stories of the people that have stood up that we know nothing of, those that have sat at the lunch counter table, and various acts of humanity and bravery that are such an inspiration. So we're committed to creating opportunities to see and hear one another's stories. And when we do, we learn more about one another and we start to identify as brothers and sisters. So thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Tony Fish from Unity of Frederick, Maryland. Are you with us?
Good afternoon. We had a very open and interesting conversation. I think, as most have already said, one of the things that came to us was that we really did not realize, so many did not realize the implicit bias, the role of the media, and the role of our own environments in creating in us this white privilege, this view of the world that's not inclusive, that is not fair. And so we talked about what that meant to each of us. One of our participants shared from her own experience as an American whose skin is darker than ours, the pain and the anger that for years and years she had kept pushed down, because that's how she could succeed in a world where her skin color mattered. And it has been only in the last several years, and this film brought up for her again the deep pain and the anger that she has felt the need to press down, that shows up as anxiety. And ultimately, while she has been herself successful, it takes a toll. And on all of us, it takes a toll. So we shared that awareness and shock, I think, for many of us, of just how much our biases have not shown and have not been conscious. And then the things that we want to do going forward centered around several things. One is talk. Talk to each other. Talk to each other about what we've experienced, what we see, what we don't know. Talk to our families, to our churches, to our own communities. We white folk, as Tim calls us, we have to talk to the white folks, and we have to stand up and say this is not acceptable. Not only talk with love and compassion, but also stand up and speak out. We have had some incidences here in our Frederick area of racial epithets being screamed at some of our Black athletes. That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. And it's time for us to stand up as white folks to say, that's not okay. And to find other ways that we can speak out and have it heard.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Tony.
For those who have been feeling the effects of those appetites.
Dr. Tony, I'm going to have to move us along just a little bit more quickly because we're challenged with some of the delay.
So we've begun to identify monthly gatherings so that we can speak out with each other. We are going to be, there are a number of active groups in Frederick who are working to do that, and it is our intention to connect with them and to take the courageous conversations within our own groups and out into the public. It's been a very, very open and honest discussion, and we've been really appreciative of having this opportunity to share with each other. So thank you, and thanks to this group in Frederick.
All righty. And we have Reverend Russell Headland from Unity of Fairfax. Russell, are you here?
And we had a very full and rich conversation as well. We focused the notes that I took on things we can do. And that includes basically, if you see something, say something. Don't ignore racism wherever it shows up. We talked about the need to share with young people the importance of being multicultural. My words wasn't exactly what was shared, but that's kind of the takeaway. We talked about the necessity to teach and share, especially for minority people, to teach and share what Blackness means and how it can show up. We talked about the value and the importance of addressing the laws in our country, and every bit as important, voting, the four-letter word, V-O-T-E. We talked about speaking up even when it is difficult to do so, because that will reach minds and reach hearts. We talked about the isms, and we needed to address how racism impacts Indigenous people and other ethnic and diverse minorities as well. One of our members shared about a diverse bystander intervention program that they're hosting at the Unitarian Church down the street. We talked about being self-aware of how it is we see others so that we might capture and understand some of our own unconscious biases and make them conscious. We talked about the importance of forming relationship, getting to know one another and trusting in the quality of those relationships. We had an action step for each one of us to read at least one book outside of a genre or ethnic group that's new to you. So learn about how other communities see the world and see themselves, so you might be in a clear conversation. We talked about checking ourselves and rejecting white privilege when we see it, those of us who are white, and understanding how am I being benefited by this. And if there was one word that came up repeatedly, it was educate, educate, educate. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Rich conversation, and I love getting to the action steps. Reverend Eileen Owen, Unity of Fredericksburg, Virginia, are you with us?
I am. So our bullet points are, there is a difference between the white women and the black women. That was an awareness that one of our participants noted. Leadership is not as efficient as it should be. We should change our political leaders to enforce the change. Vote came up a few times. Work with individuals as just that, individuals. Find a balance to keep working politically and socially. Examine ourselves. Do we treat people differently? While white people can get away with the pettiest things, black will be arrested and put in jail, given a court date for the very same things. We cannot change the world, but we can start with ourselves and with our community and so on. We can listen better. Injustice cannot end with people who are oppressed only. Everybody must join. And how do we tell some people to wake up? We're still asking questions and share our reasons for change, even if you are only one person. Share your reasons for change.
Thank you, Eileen. And Reverend Christy Snow from Carolina Center for Spiritual Awakening. Reverend Christy.
Hi. Yes, hi. Thank you so much for hosting this. This is, has been very meaningful to us. First thing we realized in our conversation is that we need a lot more conversation. We really got deep into the conversation quickly and wanted to explore this more. So that's the first thing right off the bat, is that we will be exploring this more. We talked a bit about color consciousness versus color blind. And one of our black members said that when you tell her that I don't see color, it means you see something wrong with being black. And that was, I think, an eye-opener for some people, because we talked about how once upon a time people would think that that was a good thing to say, I don't see color, and how that's really saying that there's something wrong with it. We also talked about how you don't know what to say sometimes, so you don't say anything when you feel overwhelmed and guilty as a white person and ashamed, and how we have to get over that and speak up and have conversations like these. Someone said, my wish is that white folks not feel shame and black folks not feel guilt. We need allies, and that starts with conversations. And these conversations are planting seeds, and we talked about how we would like to do that with our interfaith community here in Charlotte, and have more conversations that involve other houses of faith of different faiths, and also within our community at Carolina Center for Spiritual Awakening to have diversity dinners and times of just coming together and talking about how we see things differently and how we see things the same, and how we can be better allies for one another. So right off the bat, the number one thing is have more conversation, and how can we be allies to one another. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Reverend Christy. And Reverend Aaron Mccabe from Unity Village Chapel, Unity Headquarters. Aaron.
Hello. Hello. We discussed a lot of the same things came out. We talked about how emotionally painful it can be to watch the film and to have the discussion, even some discomfort in coming here today. We talked about how racism and perceptions are embedded in us and how that's true, how we all have work to do and things to look at, even if we think we don't. We talked about to some degree, where would people be now if everyone were treated equal? Where would some of our colleagues, some people that we went to high school with, where would they be now if they had the same access to education? The piece of the GI Bill and some of the, access to medical equipment, all that kind of stuff, medical treatment. So we talked about the reality in our own experience with our community. And then the importance of informing ourselves. So there were some ahas from the film about the GI Bill, about the kind of illusion of the phrase equal opportunity, and about incorrect perceptions around welfare programs. And then we talked about the next step. It really resonated to move from the idea of conversations around color blindness to color conscious, and to be really clear about that when we point out the difference, that actually makes people feel different, and that actually points out what separates us. So to become more conscious of that and to honor our diversity and become aware. And then steps on telling our stories, calling it out when we see white privilege, calling it out when we see racism, and to bring love into every situation to stop the hate. And that really starts with accepting people right where they are, and making sure that we stay in a place of love and acceptance, but not in a place that endorses behaviors that aren't oneness oriented. Then the importance of educating and teaching our young people so that this isn't recreated from generation to generation. And also, I think, allowing our younger generation to lead us and to model for them and to watch when they're modeling. And then we closed with the knowing that we have to look at the government systems that support what we're not looking to prosper, and we need to get out and vote and start getting in people that are willing to create systems that support a world that works for all.
Thank you, Aaron. Reverend Becky Whitehead and Reverend Karen Saunders, Unity of Omaha and Christ Love Unity, Omaha, Nebraska.
Thank you. So one of the initial reactions and thought processes had to do with those things that were brought to us through our families, from our parents, our experiences as we were growing up, and how that had embedded into our experiences. And for many of us, then it was also moving from what was through our childhood experiences into stepping into a greater knowing and a greater experience in cultures. Several of us remember some of the issues that were shown on the film. And I know for myself personally, it created this burning inside about it's time to change this. And as we talked about our next steps, we talked about the importance of obtaining knowledge and creating an opportunity for knowledge of all cultures, of the history of the cultures, the contributions that they make in all aspects of society, celebrating diversity, being where diversity is something that you honor and you cherish. And in that, then we're able to honor the intrinsic value of each individual, no matter what their racial background is, and moving us into that knowing of just one race, the human race. We were reminded that we should be mindful of our thoughts, our words, and our actions, and to promote that consciousness of oneness, that we have to come together and quit seeing an us and them mentality. And for every one of us, it really stood out, the whole aspect of racial consciousness instead of this whole aspect of being colorblind. We have to see each other and love each other at the depths of who we are.
Thank you. Reverend Janet Lang from Unity of Littleton, Colorado.
I thought I was going to speak.
I'm sorry, I didn't see both of you at the same time. My sincere apologies, Reverend Karen Saunders.
Thank you. Well, we all, again, as Becky said, we had a full discussion, and one thing that we know is that we are all one people. And if we understand and know that from the beginning, then we look at where the separation comes and where we can create the unity. We have that understanding of knowing that we can open ourselves to the divine oneness that we are, and that we create and think about and engage in thinking critically, critical thinking rather than thinking critically. So we have that critical thinking rather than thinking critical, so that we are opening ourselves up to the oneness, to the divine, and being a part of it, and knowing that we are all one in God's people. And that the other option that we have as we look forward to the culture that we have within this community and within the United States and also within the world is that we begin to vote. And so we vote what we know is the purpose of God's creation rather than having the ideologies of economics.
Thank you, Reverend Karen. Now, Reverend Janet from Unity of Littleton, Colorado.
Thank you. And we discussed many of the things that have already been mentioned, so I won't be repeating all of that. But this film has opened our awareness to the institutional racism that has crept into our unconscious cultural mindset. And we weren't even aware of how much bias is built into the system institutionally. And we know that it's important to become aware of labels that we put on things. For example, some things are said to be an outcome of race when they're an outcome of poverty. And just something like our Social Security system, it used to be that it was said that we earned what we were going to get from Social Security, and now it's considered to be an entitlement program. So to become very aware of the labels that we're putting on things. Some of the next steps that we feel that can be taken are understanding that we do have these biases and being aware of what words come into our mind and shifting that if needed. We need to get involved and we need to be educated. And we need to experience diversity. Where we are in this particular community, there's not a lot of diversity. So that means stepping out into other communities and, like I said, getting involved. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Janet. And Reverend John Moreland from Light on the Mountain Center for Spiritual Living in Ketchum, Idaho.
Hi there. So, of course, we also talked a lot about bias, and as well as our desire to reach out and make a bridge in that bias. But we also had some examples of how still our bias or biases can get in the way. And someone gave a really interesting story here of her experience in third grade that I think it shows the worst way possible to reach out and you think you're doing a good thing. And I just wanted to share that with you. This person is half Anglo and half Mexican. And in third grade, it was assumed that she was Anglo because her last name was an Anglo name. And her teacher found out that she was half Mexican, so she asked her to bring and wear a dress that would represent her Mexican heritage. And she was brought into the classroom, told to stand on a table, and she became the art project of her class that day for them to draw. And from that day forward, she was on the outside and seen as the other and was a social outcast. So the lesson here is maybe the teacher really thought she was reaching out culturally in some way, and it was just so inappropriate. So especially those of us that are, white like us, and we really want to reach out, but don't put someone on a table like that, or figuratively. I mean, really, what are you doing? Ask advice before you do anything. Don't insist that people come to meet you where you are, but try to make an effort to meet someone where they are if you're really trying to get to know them and to incorporate them into your life. So that's one of the big things at AHAs that we had today. Thanks.
Thank you, Reverend John. Reverend Michael Bernard Laxmore from Pasadena.
Yes, good afternoon, family. It's wonderful to be able to participate in this national dialogue. And I'm hopeful that you are seeing me. I see Reverend John Moreland's screen in front of me. But in our room, we had a lively discussion, including talking about the unspoken rules, disparities in job markets, home purchasing that many in the room have lived through. We also discussed the pain of living through decades of institutional racism. And we also talked about focusing more on emerging accomplishments, our own strengths, and fostering an awareness of our personal responsibility and the opportunity for us to take an activist role. We talked about the value of educating our children, sharing our history with our children. And then discussion came up about the value of getting a DNA test and how that helps us to realize that we are, in fact, universal beings and not as separate as we may have thought. We talked about promoting programs in our community to help uplift folks and to foster spiritually motivated social justice programs in our community. We talked about the power of one, and together we synthesized a statement that says we see an opportunity to synthesize our enlightened consciousness with spiritually motivated action. We intend to multiply the power of one and the collective force of awareness and this movement through education. And that's our personal and collective intention, and we invite you to join us in that. Peace and blessings, everyone.
And I don't know if they're in the room, green room or not, Dr. Michael Beckwith and Reverend Carolyn Wilkins from Mccabe.
Hello. Can
Carolyn?
you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you for allowing us to be a part of this. We are doing 2 programs at the same time, actually. Because Agape had service until 1:30, we weren't able to actually show the video to the larger group until just recently. So you might even hear that the film is going on as we speak. But we showed the film to the staff and to many of the ministers and got a great amount of feedback. As you may know, Agape is a diverse community. And as a result of our diversity, many of the people were aware of white privilege, but clearly not aware of the depth of the challenge we have in front of us. That it's not just subtle, they're actually legalized laws that have created racism, problems in housing, problems in employment. And I think people became much more aware of what we were doing. If you'll hold on a second, I'd like to show you the group, if you can see them.
Yeah.
Let's see. So we have a pretty large crowd here watching the program. We have about 60, 70 people. And Reverend Michael is doing a filming right now, but he will be on in about 10 minutes if you want to call back to him. But the feedback that we got from our ministers and our staff is that there's more work to be done, that it's important to have these conversations and to educate ourselves about what a difference we can make. Because I have a poster here. I have two posters that we go by. both quotes from Martin Luther King. And one is, we must learn to live together as brothers or perish as fools. And I believe that the film shows us how foolish we can be when we don't understand what we're doing. And then the other phrase that I love from Martin Luther King.
Carolyn, we're losing your sound and video.
Okay. I'm getting it further away. I guess love is the only thing capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. So we know.
Barbara, shall we go on or?
Yes, let's move on. And I'm not sure if Abigail is still on the call.
I'm still on the call. Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
All right. So I'm going to go on to our next steps. We had a beautiful discussion, and the one thing we knew is that we need to continue to educate ourselves. We want to continue to be open to shifting our beliefs, because our beliefs got us here in this position, and though we probably inherited a lot of them. We had the invitation with each other to connect with different people that are different than each of us look. So if I'm white, to connect with different races, different ethnicities, backgrounds, ages, stages of life. And we also had the invitation for communities to intentionally invite people of diverse backgrounds and expressions into leadership and to being represented on the pulpit. We also had the idea to continue to love ourselves and the areas we don't love about ourselves as part of our healing. We want to make sure that we educate our school children on being color conscious and implicit bias. We want to continue to watch movies that are from different cultures than we are. We want to stay open to change and to also listen to the stories of other people and just acknowledge those stories. We also had a discussion about including people that are different than ourselves in our inner, most private circle of trusted friends, and to look at that and to see if we aren't, to start doing that. And also for all the white people that we had in the room, the appreciation of taking on the idea of being a white ally and supporting each of our brothers and sisters that are not white, and utilizing our privilege to support and uplift those that may not have as much privilege as we do. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Dr. Deborah Johnson from Inner Light Ministries.
Hi, thank you. First of all, I just want to say how excited I am to see so many communities opening up to this movie. I think it's brilliant, and I'm moved. Some of the people here at Inner Light said the film is very promising, that in spite of the appearance of anything, we always recognize the truth first, that a broken stereotype, one being female African-American scholars were participating in the movie. So, you know, again, with this breaking of stereotypes, you know, pay attention to where white people do what we call cultural appropriation with our language, with our behavior. And when it's brought to our attention, we dismiss it as if it's nothing, when in fact it is something. And we need to educate ourselves and stop going into denial about it. Get the facts. Do your own research. You know, I work in an environment in the addiction industry myself, and I can tell you that African Americans have a lower rate of substance abuse than whites, and yet they are 10 times more to be incarcerated for it than whites. So what's wrong with that? And we need to pay attention to it and study and find out how to make it stop. People mention that Tim was, in the beginning of the movie, Tim Weiss's upbringing was in a desegregated school. Yet, even though he does this kind of work for a living, he shared his own experience about the 2 Black pilots. So even though he's one who speaks against racism, he's not immune to these thoughts, and we all have these thoughts, and to keep admitting them and bringing them out into the light and taking full responsibility, that's the only way it's going to heal. You know, people said focus more on white people who fought the fight, and keep doing it. And the last thing is that racism isn't inherent in our God-given nature, but it can be inherited. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Deborah. Reverend Kevin Ross from Unity of Sacramento.
Hello.
Kevin, are you with us?
I am with you, and I want to say, first of all, how proud I am of what's happening within our movement. I especially want to acknowledge Reverend Wendy Craig Purcell for your brave step forward to make this happen for our Association for Global New Thought. It's a ripple effect that's being felt in a powerful way. Give it to her, yeah. Give it to her. It took some courage. And so I'm grateful. It feels great. And to speak particularly for a moment as an African American, to see you take this step and it not being prompted externally by African Americans within our movement, I think it's commendable and it's powerful, and it's just very meaningful to me personally. I want to say that we took this very seriously at Unity of Sacramento, so much so that we co-sponsored an event yesterday at Unity of Sacramento with Women for Equality called Racial Healing in America. And so we've had 2 days of discussions, and now it's continuing. So I'm here in Oakland, California, because we took this whole weekend on in a powerful way. I was asked to come and open the Black Joy Parade here in Oakland, where thousands of people were gathered. But I want to do a part 1 and quickly throw it to Reverend Eric Donaldson, who is in Sacramento. I'm in Oakland, he's in Sacramento, with our congregation who has watched it. But just to give you some notes from part 1, the first thing that we looked at yesterday was color blindness versus color brave. Being color brave says, I care to know about your culture, your conversation, your ways of being. Color blindness says, I choose not to see you for who you are as you are. So encouraging us to be more color brave. We talked about yesterday the importance of not necessarily looking at yourselves as allies, but looking at yourselves as brothers and sisters. Allies always have the option to back out. You have the option to back out, to exclude yourself when it is inconvenient. Brothers and sisters belong to one another, and so we invite you to be brothers and sisters and stay in this until we fully manifest all that we are created to be collectively. We looked extensively at the history of racism in America, and we also talked about the necessity, or we looked at the importance of using white privilege to leverage and transform communities and policies where you happen to live, work, and worship. What would it be like if you could actually use your white privilege to influence the circles where you live, work, and worship? And so we talked about that. And this quote came about. It says, when we heal our nation, when people of goodwill summon the courage to come face to face and heart to heart, to listen to the deep music in each other, rather than hearing the brassy noise about each other, the reality has always been that race is a broken concept that cannot be healed, but people who learn to see others as people can help other hurting people to heal. And with that, I want to throw it to Reverend Eric Donaldson, who is with our group at Unity of Sacramento.
Thank you, Rev. Kev. We are very special. We are we have been, and my commitment is to have the racial healing in America
Barbara, can you
yesterday.
communicate with him?
And so having this conversation, can you hear me well?
Oh, that's better now.
Okay. Having this conversation the way that we did yesterday with attorneys and psychologists and psychiatrists and historians, and then coming this day to see White Like Me became a confirmation for those who participated in the conference. And for those who didn't participate in the conference, it became an eye-opening event. There was one person here that mentioned that he understood that he had privilege here in America, but he did not understand to what extent it had taken place, to what degree it had, and how far back in history it had gone. Some people here were surprised that African Americans did not get Social Security or when it was first formed. They did not know that it was called welfare for us, but called something else, marketed as something else for others. They were surprised at what they heard about what was caught on tape with Mr. Atwater and the strategy politically that has been utilized. And so there were a lot of firsts, a lot of ahas, a lot of eye-opening statements and information that the movie brought about. And so my thoughts on this is that the time is now to really bring further awareness. And I can't think of a better space, a better place than the churches and centers in the New Thought movement to have this conversation in a safe and respectful way, acknowledging one another's contributions and Christ-likeness and light in creating something different in the world that works for all. Thank you.
Thank you. And Reverend Lonnie Howard from Cear Center for Spiritual Living. Are you with us, Lonnie?
I don't see Lonnie on the screen anymore, so let's go to Dr. Richard Held.
Richard?
Love comes to you from Unity in Linwood. Thank you for doing this. We've prepared a statement that summarizes our conversation. We at Unity in Linwood experience sensations of pain, and we experience sensations of sadness, the pain of regret about the past, some sadness of uncertainty about the future. How eager, some ask, is humanity to elevate itself into and live from a consciousness of unity and oneness? How willing is humanity to become conscious of that which we are unconscious of? How ready is humanity to finally see our own blind spots? How prepared is humanity to dismantle the code words of racism so embedded on the tongues of humanity? And how positioned is humanity to move through the complexities of pain and sadness and to redirect those energies toward something of a long overdue change? From all of the questions, however, one rang clear: what can we do? Well, our first step, answered one, is to establish humility as the cornerstone, curiosity as the driver, and compassion as the way into new ways of being together. Upon this, we can pause, we can talk, we can make personal connections, and we can demonstrate in every encounter that right here and that right now is a person who's willing to give rise to the fundamental oneness, which is the reality of our existence together. We can carry this consciousness from these rooms today into the daily experiences of this human life. I might not know what to do, said another, but even in my not knowing, I'm willing to stand with. I might not know what to do, said another, but what I can know is that I'm committed to being one who shows up. So are we eager? Are we willing? Are we ready? Are we prepared? And are we positioned? And the answer comes loudly from Unity in Linwood. The answer is yes. And while there's a fear that this may take another lifetime, in the voice of one, she represents us when she says, I have hope. We have faith. Things are changing for the better.
Amen.
Amen. Away. Oh my goodness. Perfect.
And I don't know if she's still with us, but our very last minister is Reverend Gayle Dillon from Genesis Global Spiritual Center in Washington.
Yes, I'm still with you. Thank you so much for hosting this. It's really wonderful to see everybody involved and speaking so clearly on white privilege. We were really surprised, most of us with the movie, some of the information that was presented that we didn't know about, as others have spoke about the Social Security system, the GI bills, that how we have systematically kept people separate. And not being aware of that, I don't think is really an excuse. And so one of the things that we decided as a group is to really educate ourselves and to vote, as people have said in the past. And here at Genesis, we've started curated conversations on social justice. And we started that back in September. And so this is our second quarter going through it. And so conversation, I think, is really important, and really getting into knowing other people as people instead of as a race, or just seeing people for who they are, and really talking about how we're different and how we've been raised different and how we can come together and share. So that's what we came up with here. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Gayle. So join me for a moment, wherever you are, in a nice deep breath. Just breathe that in and breathe that out. And I acknowledge you and all of the New Thought people sitting in other rooms and other places who have participated today. We acknowledge you and thank you for staying with this and for being willing to educate ourselves around some things that might have been uncomfortable to hear or surprising and shocking. And so I've been asked, and I promise I'm very good at time, to wrap up very tightly and succinctly some of the themes that emerged. It seems that we are all aware of how critically important keeping the conversation going is, and to have the courage to have those conversations, and to have the courage to do what we can to address racism wherever we see it directly in that moment. We heard the theme of education again and again, that we need to continue to educate ourselves, especially those of us who are white, to educate ourselves and to know that that doesn't mean that we are bad, but that we need to be aware of things that we didn't know, systems and structures that have been in place and continue to be in place that foster racism, that we need to increase our sensitivity and be willing to reach out beyond any of our differences and genuinely connect with others and hear others. We heard again and again the importance of transcending what I think many of us grew up with. I know I did in my generation, that we almost prided ourselves on being colorblind. And wow, what an eye-opener that is for those of us who are colored light-skinned to realize, no, that is so disempowering and so disconnecting and so, what's the word I'm looking for? It says that we don't see you when we say that we are colorblind, but instead to be color aware, to be color conscious, to be color brave. And of course, we heard again and again as well the importance of us getting out there and voting and letting our voices be heard in that way. I acknowledge you again for bearing with some of the glitches and challenges. We were committed to trying to end right at 3:30, and I actually think we could have if we had had faster connections, despite that some of us spoke a little bit longer, which just happens as ministers. We never know how long 90 seconds is or 2 minutes, most of us anyway. And so I do want to just finish with a couple of things that that you might be interested in pursuing. I understand from our executive director, Barbara Fields, executive director of AGNT, that there is an plans for an interfaith march in Washington, D.C. around the issue of race. That's all the detail that I know right now, but if you are interested, I'm sure you can find that information out going online, an interfaith march in Washington, D.C. on the topic of race, and I imagine Barbara can even put it up on the AGNT website. In line with the idea of continuing to educate ourselves, there are a couple of other movies that I'm aware of that you might find of interest. One is the movie called 13th, like the number 13, 13th, and it is about the 13th Amendment, and it's about the topic of mass incarceration, and it is very much of an eye-opening movie, every bit as much so as White Like Me. And then Tim Weiss does have a new movie documentary that he's produced. I have not yet seen it. It is called The Great White Hoax. And those are just a couple that I'm aware of. And I want to close with a quote that I'm remembering the gist of it. I may have some of the words not quite accurate, but it really struck me. And it struck me in the realm of whether we're talking about racism or homophobia, the idea of this, that when we accept somebody, it is like inviting them to the party. And we might think how great that is. I'm accepting of people, I've invited you to the party. But what we're really wanting to do is go way beyond acceptance to inclusion. And inclusion is, I don't just invite you to the party, I dance with you. So I think we need to dance with each other. Namaste. Bye-bye, everybody. I know all the other churches probably think this, but you guys are the best.